Why was the radio silent when they needed it most? The question hammered through Lieutenant Jack Blackwood's mind as he pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall. Dust clung to his sweat-soaked face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of decisions piling onto his shoulders. 3 men were bleeding out. Enemy fire raked the building from every direction, and the sandstorm rolling in from the west was about to seal them into a tomb. "Target's second floor, southwest corner," shouted. His voice was barely audible over the staccato chatter of AKs shredding stone and glass. Blackwood ducked as a bullet split the wall inches above his head. He could feel the sting of concrete fragments cutting his cheek, mixing with the blood already dripping from a gash over his right eye. His team was 6 strong when the op began. Now 3 were down, Daniels pale and fatting fast, with his collarbone shattered, Martinez curled in the corner clutching his abdomen. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The intel had promised a clean capture mission, in and out, but the city had teeth and had always lied to outsiders. "Central, this is Blackwood," he barked into the radio. "We need immediate air support. 3 men down, heavy fire from all sides." Static, then a voice clipped and clinical. "Negative, Blackwood. Sandstorm grounded all aircraft. No artillery too dense with civilians. Hold position." Hold position. His best friend was bleeding out, their escape routes locked by enemy sharpshooters, and command wanted him to hold. He swore under his breath. He wasn't afraid of dying, but the thought of failing his men, that was the kind of terror he never admitted out loud. Daniels looked at him, gray-faced, lips trembling. Blackwood didn't need words to know what those eyes were asking. "Please don't let me die here." The radio crackled again. "Extraction team is ready, but snipers have all approaches locked down. They're in the Al Tower." Blackwood risked a glance through a jagged hole in the wall. 800 meters away, the ancient stone minaret glowed amber in the late sun, a perfect sniper nest. From that vantage, the enemy could kill anything that moved on the street below. "Then neutralize those snipers," Blackwood growled. The silence that followed made his stomach drop. Finally, 2 counter-snipers already attempted, is hit. Anderson has no clear shot. The words settled over him like a death sentence. Without those rifles silenced, no one was getting out. He slammed his fist into the wall, ignoring the pain. "Then who the hell do you have left?" The reply came steady, deliberate. "We're sending in Staff Sergeant Sarah Reeves." Blackwood froze. That name, that woman. He fought her assignment months ago, made his case that she didn't belong on the mission roster. He'd called her a liability, and now command was sending her as his only lifeline. "You're sending a woman, while my men are dying." His anger erupted before he could stop it. The reply was steel. "She's the best shot we've got. Your only shot, deal with it." Blackwood wanted to argue. He wanted to scream. But Daniels groaned, blood poolsing out faster, and the lieutenant knew pride was a currency he could no longer afford. 8 miles away at Fob Liberty, Staff Sergeant Sarah Reeves sat alone in a canvas tent, her rifle broken down piece by piece before her. She'd already cleaned it twice today, but ritual was her armor. She wiped the barrel with reverent care, running her thumb along the cool steel as though it were an old friend. At 28, her face still carried youth, but her eyes told a harsher truth. Years of looking through glass at human shapes she'd ended. She wasn't supposed to hear the comms feed, but news traveled fast through a base. SEAL team pinned, 3 down, snipers cutting off extraction, impossible shot, and now they wanted her. When Colonel entered the tent, she was already waiting. Her gear in order, her decision made. "SEALs are trapped," he said, not wasting words. "Snipers in the Al Tower, and Anderson failed. Daniels is bleeding out." Sarah nodded once. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her breathing didn't change. She simply absorbed the details the way her grandfather had taught her decades ago. Distance, wind, heat shimmer, terrain, all variables, none impossible. "Blackwood's the team lead," added, watching her reaction. The name cut through her composure like a blade. Blackwood, the man who had publicly dismissed her during a mission briefing, who'd requested her replacement with the phrase, "We need a real shooter, not a political experiment." She remembered standing silent in that room, humiliation burning under her skin, while men who didn't know her smirked at the floor. His eyes softened slightly. "He's not happy about this. He said things over the radio." Sarah tied her hair back, expression like stone. "Doesn't matter what he thinks, only matters what I can do." Nodded. "That's why I'm sending you, because right now you're the only hope those men have of coming home." The desert of her memory was snow. Montana, 1986. She was 7 years old, cheeks flushed from cold, cradling an ancient Springfield rifle nearly as long as she was tall. Her grandfather Walter knelt beside her in the snow, his breath fogging. "Feel the rifle become part of you," he whispered. She squinted at the pine cone on the fence post 200 yards away. Tiny, insignificant, yet impossibly far for her hands. "What's the first thing we consider?" Walter asked. "The wind," Sarah replied softly. "And how do we read it?" "Watch the snow drift, the patterns." He smiled, a rare thing. "Good girl, remember instruments fail. The land never lies, you just have to listen." She squeezed the trigger. The recoil rocked her tiny body, but through the scope she watched the pine cone explode into splinters. Walter's face remained impassive, but his eyes glowed with pride. "Your father couldn't do that until he was 10. Those words etched into her like scripture. Years later, after Walter passed, she still carried his Springfield and his journal, pages filled with cryptic notes, weather readings and coordinates she didn't yet understand. What she did understand was his lesson, that pulling a trigger wasn't about killing. It was about responsibility, a weight you carried forever. At sniper school, Sarah had carried that weight while men bet she wouldn't last the week. They sabotaged her gear, sneered at her presence. But she had endured. She broke records, graduated top of her class, walked off that field with a sniper tab handed reluctantly by the very men who doubted her. But the doubts had never really left. They lingered in hallways, in briefings, in the silences when someone mentioned her name. Blackwood had been the loudest voice. And now, irony demanded she answer his final call. As Sarah packed her rifle, she a faded piece of cloth from her kit. Her grandfather's old bandana, frayed from time, tied carefully around the stock. A reminder, not luck, not superstition, just a tether to the man who taught her that the bullet was more than lead and powder. It was a decision that could never be undone. Colonel studied her face one last time. "You understand what you're walking into?" "Yes, sir." "This shot couldn't make it. Anderson couldn't make it." Sarah looked him in the eye. "Then I will." The colonel paused, and Blackwood. She slid the bolt into place with a clean, final click. "He'll learn it doesn't matter what he thinks of me, only whether his men live to see another sunrise." Back in the ruined building, Blackwood pressed the radio against his ear, static filling the silence. For the first time since the firefight began, he felt something foreign creeping into his chest. Not fear, not anger, hope laced with bitterness. He didn't believe she could make the shot. Not really. But Daniels was slipping away fast, and pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. "God help us all," he muttered, eyes drifting back to the minaret glowing like fire in the dying sun. Somewhere in the distance, Sarah Reeves was already on her way. What kind of silence lives between men who know they might not see another dawn? Inside the crumbling three-story ruin, that silence had become heavier than the gunfire outside. Lieutenant Jack Blackwood knelt over Daniels, pressing his own hands against the tourniquet Cooper had tied around the leg. The blood had slowed, but not enough. Daniels' breaths came shallow, each one sounding like a clock ticking down. Grown nearby, trying and failing to sit upright with his shattered collarbone, Martinez clutched his side, lips pressed white. 3 men, all wounded. 3 anchors pulling the rest of the team deeper into the grave. Whispered through clenched teeth, "Lieutenant, we're running out of ammo." Blackwood didn't answer. His eyes drifted again to the owl minaret. The tower stood proud, ancient stone glowing amber in the last stretch of sunlight. Behind those narrow slits of windows, unseen rifles waited with perfect patience. He hated silence from the other end of a rifle. It meant someone was watching, waiting, calculating. That silence was more lethal than the bursts of automatic fire echoing from the alleys. The radio crackled. "Lieutenant Blackwood, stand by. Reeves is en route." Blackwood's jaw locked. Reeves, of all people. He wanted to curse, but instead he pressed harder on Daniel's leg, watching his friend's eyes flutter. Pride was poison, but it was the only thing keeping his chest from caving in. 3 blocks away, Sarah Reeves moved through the alleyways with her spotter, Sergeant Mason, a pack of gear biting into her shoulders. The Humvee had dropped them as close as possible, but the last stretch was on foot. The city around them was alive with gunfire, shouts, and the thud of distant RPGs. Mason breathed hard beside her, but he kept pace. Young, eager, competent, she trusted his eyes even if his hands still shook under pressure. He carried the spotting scope slung across his chest, already rehearsing the numbers in his head. They slipped into the stairwell of an abandoned apartment building. The smell of dust and rot pressed in. Sarah's boots whispered over the concrete as they climbed, rifles slung, the echo of each step like a countdown. When they reached the rooftop, the city opened before them in fractured light. To the northeast, the minaret dominated the skyline. Its silhouette glowed golden under a sky bruised by the advancing wall of sand. "There," Mason said, pointing to the shadowed slits of the tower. "I count at least 4 positions." Sarah unfolded her shooting mat, laying her rifle down with deliberate calm. Every movement was ritual precise, the way her grandfather had drilled into her. She tied the faded strip of his bandana around the stock. Mason set up his scope, calibrating distance. Range 807 meters, elevation 42 meters up, crosswind fluctuating 13 to 20 miles per hour, northwest angle. Sarah adjusted her scope with steady fingers. The wind would be the problem. Urban winds swirled like ghosts between buildings, unpredictable, vicious. Her cheek rested against the stock. She inhaled, exhaled. The world narrowed to the amber tower. Her radio hissed. "Reeves, situation is deteriorating. Daniels has less than 30 minutes." Her jaw tightened. She didn't reply with promises. Promises meant nothing here. Only execution did. Once when she was 12, she'd lain in a Montana field with Walter Reeves, Springfield pressed against her shoulder. Her body had wanted to twitch, to scratch, to shift. But Walter had made her lie still for hours, watching deer graze beyond the tree line. "Patience," he'd whispered. "Most people break because they can't stand silence. They need to move, to speak, to prove they're alive. But stillness is the sniper's greatest weapon. Stillness makes you invisible." She hated him in that moment, the ache in her legs, the bugs biting her skin. But later, when a buck finally stepped into the clearing and she squeezed the trigger, the memory of stillness had turned into clarity. Now on this rooftop in Iraq, she carried that lesson like a scar. Blackwood crouched behind broken concrete, sweat streaking down his neck. He had stopped speaking, his voice gone raw. Cooper still worked on Daniels, whispering things no one could hear. The sniper's silence from the minaret pressed on them like a weight. It was psychological warfare. The enemy wanted them restless, afraid to move, burning through adrenaline until exhaustion broke them. And it was working. Blackwood pressed the radio. "Command, I need confirmation Reeves is in position." The pause before the reply was too long. "She's setting up now, Lieutenant. Hold." Hold, the word burned in his ears. How long could a man hold when the life drained out of his friend in spurts of crimson? He looked again at the minaret, muttering under his breath. She better be what they claim. Sarah's scope drank in the minaret. Heat shimmer bent the air, turning the tower into a wavering mirage. She adjusted her elevation dial, her windage knob, her breathing. Western window, second level, Mason whispered, spotting scope locked in. Movement, definite barrel flash. Sarah shifted, crosshairs centered on the slit of shadow. She couldn't see the man, only the suggestion of presence, the kind of faint movement only a trained eye could read. Range 807, wind 18 gusting to 20, Mason murmured. Her finger found the trigger. She drew in a half-breath, holding steady. The world shrank. The storm, the wounded, the doubts, Blackwood's disdain, all of it collapsed into one narrow line of glass and steel. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, a sharp thunder that echoed across the rooftop. Through her scope, she saw stone explode inches from the target, a near miss. Impact frame, Mason confirmed. He pulled back. Sarah didn't curse, she didn't flinch. She adjusted one click left, exhaled, and whispered to herself. Again. In the ruins, Blackwood jerked as the sniper fire paused. For the first time in hours, the tower fell silent. Cooper looked up, hope flickering in his blood-smeared face. "Lieutenant, did she?" Blackwood didn't answer, but inside something shifted, not belief, not yet, but possibility. He stared at the minaret, amber against the storm-darkened sky, and whispered like a confession. "Come on, Reeves, prove me wrong." What happens when the enemy across the scope is just as patient as you are? Sarah Reeves lay prone on the rooftop, cheek pressed to the stock, eyes locked through glass at a shadow 800 meters away. The world around her shifted in currents of heat and dust, but inside her scope it was all narrowed to a slit of stone and darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, a man was waiting with his own rifle trained toward the ruin where Blackwood SEALs fought to stay alive. Mason's whisper barely stirred the air. "Western window, he's back," barrel just shifted. Sarah didn't move. She adjusted the pressure on her trigger, her breathing sinking with the slow beat of her heart. The storm at her back growled closer, a brown wall devouring the horizon, the sound of it already in her ears like a low drumbeat. Range 807, wind 16 northwest, gusting 19. Her crosshairs hovered, patience, patience. Then she saw it, the faintest gleam of glass in the shadow, a scope catching the last kiss of sun. That was all she needed. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, kicking into her shoulder. Through her scope, she saw the barrel jerk violently, stone shattering, then silence. "Target neutralized," Mason breathed, disbelief lacing his voice. "One down." Sarah didn't celebrate. She simply shifted, scanning the next window. She knew there were at least 3 more. In the ruin, Blackwood's head snapped up at the absence of sniper fire. His ears rang with silence. For the first time in hours, no bullet snapped through the air when he shifted near the window. "Sniper fire's cut off," whispered, eyes wide. Blackwood stared at the tower. "Did she?" He didn't finish. He didn't dare believe yet. But Daniel's shallow breaths reminded him belief didn't matter, results did. "Southern window," Mason whispered urgently. "Movement." Sarah swung her rifle smoothly, settling crosshairs on the next narrow slit of stone. Shadows swallowed everything, but she knew the rhythm of a sniper. They had to expose themselves eventually. Range unchanged, wind 20 steady, gusts 22. She adjusted, the storm now pushing harder, dust starting to veil the horizon. Then there, a flicker of outline against the darkness, the subtle shift of a shoulder. She fired, the recoil bucked. Through her scope she caught the body drop back into shadow. Hit confirmed, target down, 2 eliminated. Mason exhaled hard, almost a laugh. "Hell, Reeves, that's 2 in under 5 minutes. But Sarah's eyes didn't leave the scope. "They'll adapt. The last 2 will be patient, professionals." In the ruin, gritted his teeth, clutching his shoulder. "Lieutenant, it's quieter, I can feel it." Blackwood wanted to scoff, but even he felt it. The pressure had shifted. The noose wasn't as tight. Whoever Reeves was, she was forcing the enemy to blink first. Daniels groaned, blood soaking through bandages despite Cooper's desperate hands. Blackwood pressed his palm to his friend's forehead. "Hold on, brother. Just a little longer." He found himself muttering words he never thought he'd say. "Come on, Reeves." On the rooftop, Mason's voice was tight. "Eastern window, he's seen us." A flash of light cut across Sarah's scope. The enemy sniper had fired first. The round smashed into the concrete inches from her head, showering her with shards. Mason cursed, ducking low. "Stay down, he's got us zeroed." Sarah didn't move. Her cheeks stayed welded to the stock. Her breathing didn't change. The enemy had revealed his position, and that was all she needed. She adjusted for wind, for elevation, for the faint shimmer of heat still rippling the view. Then she whispered, not moving. The enemy prepared another shot. She saw the glint again. She fired first. The crack split the rooftop. Through her scope she saw the glass shatter, the rifle vanish into the darkness. Silence followed. "Direct hit," Mason whispered, almost reverent. "That's 3." Sarah finally blinked. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't wipe it away. She only shifted again, scanning for the last threat. The ruin felt different now. Raised his head too high, and no bullet came. Martinez whispered something that almost sounded like a prayer. Blackwood pressed the radio, his voice cracked despite himself. "Central, this is Blackwood. We're seeing reduced sniper fire. Status Reeves." The reply came steady. 3 confirmed neutralized, 1 remaining. Blackwood shut his eyes. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to curse. Instead, he looked down at Daniels, lips blue, breath shallow. "You hang on, Mike. She's almost done." The storm roared closer now, swallowing the horizon in a wall of red-brown dust. Visibility was shrinking. They had maybe 20 minutes before the city vanished in it. Mason scanned the tower frantically. Northern window, gone dark. He knows he's alone. He's not exposing himself. Sarah adjusted her scope, eyes narrowing. "He'll move. They always do. Last man standing doesn't want to die in silence." Minutes crawled. Her heartbeat slowed, syncing with the rhythm of her breath. Dust stung her eyes. Mason shifted uneasily, but Sarah lay still, statue-like, waiting. Then movement. A shadow shifting behind stone. The faint silhouette of a man leaning into position. "North window," Mason whispered sharply. "Range unchanged. Wind 20 steady, gusts 25. Sarah's finger found the trigger. The world fell away. Just the line, the bullet, the certainty of her grandfather's voice in memory. "Become the bullet, Sarah. See not just where things are, but where they will be." She fired. The round cut through dust and heat. In her scope, she watched the silhouette collapse. "Target down," Mason confirmed, awe in his tone. "All 4 neutralized." Sarah exhaled, long and slow. Extraction route clear. In the ruin, Blackwood's radio erupted. "Reaper 6, this is Central. Sniper threat neutralized. Extraction inbound. Hold position." For the first time in hours, Blackwood laughed. It came out ragged, almost broken. He pressed his forehead against the wall, whispering, "Son of a bitch, she did it." Cooper met his eyes, still pressing against Daniel's wound. "Lieutenant, she saved us." Blackwood couldn't answer. Not yet. He only looked out at the tower, the amber stone now fading into the oncoming storm. Somewhere up there, Reeves had pulled off the impossible. And for the first time, Jack Blackwood felt something he'd sworn he'd never give her. Respect. What happens when the sky itself turns against you? The sound of rotor blades reached them first, faint but distinct, a low thrumming above the gunfire. Blackwood lifted his head, disbelief flashing in his eyes. After hours of waiting for a miracle, the cavalry had finally come. But the desert doesn't give without taking. The sandstorm hit like a freight train. From the ruined windows, the world vanished into a red-brown haze. The ancient minaret disappeared as if swallowed by the earth itself. The sun smothered. The city turned into a tomb of dust and choking wind. Visibility dropping to zero, shouted, coughing into his sleeve. The radio crackled with static. A pilot's strained voice broke through. Reaper 6, this is Hawk 2, storm on us, can't hold visual. You'll have to reach rooftop for hoist, over. Blackwood's stomach sank. Daniels couldn't walk, barely could. Martinez was bleeding. Rooftop extraction meant hauling wounded men through stairwells already shaking under the storm. He pressed the radio. Central, the storm's grounding us. We won't make it up top in time. Static, then Colonel's voice, clipped and hard. Then you'll hold until conditions improve. Reeves has cleared the snipers. She's your cover until the birds can return. Blackwood slammed the wall with his fist. We don't have that kind of time. He looked down at Daniels, eyes fluttering shut. Cooper shook his head slowly, blood soaking his hands. For the first time since the fight began, Blackwood felt helpless. On her rooftop perch, Sarah Reeves shielded her eyes against the wall of dust sweeping over the city. The world around her dissolved into swirling grit. The minaret vanished. Even Mason's outline beside her blurred. Storms cutting visibility to 50 meters and falling, Mason shouted over the howl. Choppers can't land in this. Sarah kept her rifle shouldered, eyes to her scope though she could see nothing but red haze. The wind howled so loud it was hard to hear her own thoughts, but deep inside she felt it. Her job wasn't done. She pressed her radio. Reaper 6, this is Reeves. Sniper threat is neutralized, but you need to move. I'll cover your approach. Blackwood's voice came back through static, ragged. We can't move 3 wounded in this storm. You're wasting your time, Reeves. Extraction's impossible. Sarah's jaw tightened. She could almost hear his defeat bleeding through the words. Nothing's impossible, not while they're still breathing. She shifted her scope again, straining through the storm. Shapes flickered in the dust. Movement. Fighters using the storm as cover. They're closing in on you, Sarah said calmly. North Alley, 5 hostiles moving through the dust. His voice came back on the net, urgent. Contact north side. Reeves, you seeing them? I've got them. She steadied her rifle. The storm pulled at her breath, grit stung her eyes, but she slowed everything down, just like Montana winters, just like watching snow drift across the valley. The wind had a rhythm. Even in chaos there was pattern. She squeezed. One shadow dropped. She adjusted, fired again. Another fell. Mason called targets, his voice nearly lost in the howl. 2 left, closing fast. Sarah fired. 1 collapsed into dust. The last came through too quick, storm masking his sprint. Sarah shifted, but before she could fire, Blackwood's M4 barked from the ruin. The man spun down into the dirt. For the first time, their rifles spoke in harmony. Inside the ruin, Cooper's face was pale as he leaned over Daniels. He's fatting, Lieutenant. We've got minutes, not hours. Blackwood stared at the storm clawing its way through shattered windows. His chest felt like iron. His men looked at him, waiting. They always looked at him, even when he had no answers left. He pressed the radio again, voice raw. Central, this is Blackwood. I don't care what the storm says. If we don't move now, Daniels is gone. Colonel's voice cut back through static. Then move, Lieutenant. Reeves will cover you. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only one he had. You're on point. Cooper, Martinez, you carry Daniels. I'll cover the rear. Move on my mark. His men nodded, tired but ready. Soldiers always moved when asked, no matter how broken they were. He muttered under his breath, words he never thought he'd say. Reeves, if you've got more miracles left, now's the time. The stairwell was a tomb of dust and echoing boots as the seals half-dragged, half-carried Daniels down. The building groaned under the storm, each gust shaking the fragile concrete like an earthquake. Sarah tracked them from afar, Mason calling out movement in the haze. Fighters used the storm to creep closer, emboldened now that their overwatch was gone. Contact east side, Mason hissed. 203. Sarah adjusted, fired blind into the blur, trusting rhythm more than sight. The first round missed, sparking stone. She shifted, squeezed again. One shadow toppled. The second fired blind into the dust. Rounds smacked into the wall beside Blackwood as he shielded his men. Reeves, Blackwood barked into the radio. On him, she said calmly, breath steady. She adjusted, accounted for wind and guesswork. The shot cracked. The fighter dropped in mid-run. Last one's breaking back, Mason called. Let him, Sarah said. He'll spread the fear. Blackwood heard her words through static. He hated to admit it, but she was right. Fear was worth more than a bullet sometimes. The SEALs reached the alley, dragging Daniels between them, dust swirling so thick it was hard to see each other. The storm howled like a living thing, clawing at their eyes and throats. Cursed, Lieutenant, we're not gonna make it. Blackwood bit down on panic. We keep moving. Then his radio crackled again. Sarah's voice, steady, unshaken. I've got your path. Head west 2 blocks, then south. There's a collapsed building you can hold until the storm passes. Blackwood frowned. You can't see that from where you are. Silence for a beat. Then, I've been studying the maps, trust me. The words stung more than he wanted to admit. Trust me. The last time he'd trusted a woman in combat, 3 of his men had died, but Daniels groaned in his arms, pulling him back to the present. He exhaled hard, nodding to his men. West 2 blocks, then south. Move. Sarah tracked them through the storm, firing when shadows appeared, guiding with calm words that carried more weight than orders. She didn't think about whether Blackwood respected her. She didn't think about what would happen if she failed. She thought only of 6 men who needed to go home, and of her grandfather's voice, echoing like scripture in the storm. The bullet isn't about what you want. It's about what others need. By the time the SEALs reached the collapsed building, Daniels was ghostly pale, pulse barely aflutter. Blackwood pressed his forehead to his friends, whispering, "Stay with me." Over the radio, Sarah's voice came again, softer now. "Hold position. Storm will break within the hour. Extraction will return." Blackwood leaned back against the wall, chest heaving, dust caked to his skin. For the first time, he let his head fall, whispering words he never thought he'd give her. "Reeves, thank you." The radio stayed silent for a long beat. Then her voice, calm and steady. "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. We're not out." What do you tell yourself in the hour between life and death? The collapsed building offered little shelter. Its roof was gone, walls half caved, but it was enough to shield them from the worst of the storm's fury. Dust swirled in through jagged cracks, coating everything in a fine red film. Blackwood slumped against a wall, his rifle across his lap. Daniels lay at his feet, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven rhythm. Cooper knelt beside him, still applying pressure, hands raw and shaking, and scanned the broken doorway, eyes darting through the storm as though shapes might materialize at any second. The storm howled around them, a sound that reminded Blackwood of wolves circling prey. They couldn't see the sky. They couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. They were blind in enemy territory, holding on by threads. He pressed his radio. Static hissed, then Sarah's voice cut through, steady, unshaken. "Status." Blackwood swallowed. He hated how much relief washed through him just hearing her voice. "We're in cover. Daniels is critical. The others are holding." "Storm will break soon," she replied. "Until then, conserve strength." He looked at his men, at the dust filling Daniels' lungs, at the fear written in eyes too proud to admit it. Conserve strength. He wasn't sure they had any left. On her rooftop, Sarah lay with her rifle beside her, scope blind in the storm. She could see nothing now, only the shifting curtain of dust that erased the city into a formless void. Mason hunched close, scarf over his mouth, voice muffled. "We can't see a damn thing. If hostiles push in, we're blind." Sarah didn't answer right away. She stared into the storm as though her eyes could carve through it, as though sheer will could hold back the tide. "Sometimes being blind teaches you to listen harder," she murmured. Mason frowned. "Listen to what?" Her gaze softened, memory bleeding in. "When I was a kid, my grandfather used to make me close my eyes before a shot. Said if you only rely on sight, you'll always miss what matters most. Wind has a sound. Distance has a weight. Even silence carries shape if you're willing to hear it." Mason gave her a long look. "That sounds impossible." She allowed herself the faintest smile. "So does everything until it's done." Blackwood sat in the half-light of the ruin, Daniel's labored breathing filling the space. He watched silently strip magazines, counting rounds left. Too few, always too few. He hated waiting. He hated storms. He hated relying on someone else, especially her. And yet he couldn't shake the truth. Without Reeves, they'd already be dead. The thought twisted inside him. He remembered the briefing months ago, standing tall at the head of the table while she sat quietly at the far end. He dismissed her in front of everyone, said she was an experiment, said politics was replacing warriors. He remembered the sting in her eyes, quickly hidden, and the smirks of men around the table who'd agreed with him. Now those same men, what was left of them, owed their survival to the woman he'd ridiculed. He stared at Daniel's pale face. Pride seemed like a cruel luxury. "Lieutenant." The voice dragged him from thought, had shifted closer, one arm cradled tight against his shattered collarbone. "Do you think we're getting out?" Blackwood hesitated. The leader in him wanted to lie, to say yes without pause, but his voice came out rougher, quieter. "We've still got a shot." Gave a faint grin, teeth dust-stained. "A shot's all we need." Blackwood studied his men, broken, bleeding, exhausted, and felt the weight press harder. He'd always prided himself on carrying them, on being the spine that never bent. But tonight, that spine felt close to breaking. He pressed the radio again, almost against his better judgment. "Reeves." Her reply came immediate. "I'm here." Silence stretched. He realized he didn't even know what he wanted to say. Apology, gratitude, command, none of it fit. Finally, "Why did you volunteer for this?" On her rooftop, Sarah closed her eyes. The storm rattled the world, dust biting her skin. But the question cut deeper than shrapnel. She thought of Montana, of Walter's steady hands guiding hers, of her father's absence, of men in briefing rooms laughing behind their hands, of silence she'd carried into every mission, silence that weighed heavier than her rifle. Her answer came soft but clear. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind, and I'll never let anyone else feel that way if I can stop it." The channel went quiet. Blackwood stared at the radio, words caught in his throat. Something shifted inside him, subtle but undeniable. Time dragged like an open wound. The storm clawed at them, howling through the cracks. Cooper dozed in fits, his hands never leaving Daniel's wound. Kept watch, eyes red from grit. Blackwood fought sleep, fought despair. His men leaned on him even in silence. And yet the one steady voice that broke through the storm wasn't his own, it was hers. Every few minutes Sarah would check in. Not with orders, not with false promises, just with presence. A simple "I'm still here." It shouldn't have mattered, but in that storm it meant everything. Sarah lay flat, eyes closed now, not bothering with her scope. She listened. To the wind shifting against walls, to the storm's rhythm, to the faint cracks of distant gunfire beyond the city's shroud. Mason dozed beside her, exhaustion pulling him under. She stayed awake. She always stayed awake. She thought of all the times she'd been told she didn't belong, all the times her silence was mistaken for weakness. Tonight, her silence was the only thing holding men together miles away. She remembered her grandfather's words, etched into her bones. "Stillness makes you invisible, but it also makes you unshakable." She held onto that truth as the storm raged. Hours crawled. At last the storm's howl began to soften. The dust thinned, faint shapes reappearing in the world. The first streaks of dawn broke through, pale light painting the ruin where the seals huddled. Blackwood squinted toward the horizon. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he could see sky. The radio crackled, Sarah's voice calm but edged with urgency. Storms lifting. Hostiles will move again, stay sharp. Blackwood pushed himself upright, exhaustion burning through his body. He looked at Daniels, skin waxy, breaths faint. We're out of time. Met his eyes, rifle ready. Then we move. Blackwood nodded, pressing the radio. Reeves, guide us out. For a long moment the channel was quiet. Then her voice, low but steady. I will. What happens when the first light of dawn only reveals new dangers? The storm had thinned into a ghost of itself, dust still hanging in the air like smoke from a battlefield. The ruined city emerged in fragments, broken walls, shattered glass, alleys painted red with the early sun. Blackwood squinted into the haze, eyes raw from grit. His men stirred around him, exhausted but alive. Daniels lay barely conscious, breath shallow, skin pale as wax. Time was leaking from him like blood through Cooper's hands. The radio hissed. Sarah's voice came through, firm but low. Reaper 6, the storm's breaking, but so is your window. Fighters will be moving on you again soon. Blackwood swallowed, glancing at, then back at Daniels. Then we move before they tighten the noose. Agreed, Sarah replied. I'll scout ahead, watch your flanks. There was no hesitation in her tone, no crack in her calm. Blackwood hated how much he needed that steadiness, how much it steadied him. On her rooftop perch, Sarah adjusted her scope, blinking through grit and fatigue. The city stretched before her, hazy but visible now. She scanned alleys, rooftops, the minaret that had once held death in its windows. Nothing moved there anymore. Mason sat up beside her, eyes heavy but focused. I count at least a dozen new fighters regrouping east side. Looks like they're circling in. Sarah nodded. They'll try to box the seals in before extraction. Mason glanced at her, worry written in the lines of his young face. We don't have the numbers for this. Her cheek pressed against the stock. We don't need numbers, we just need precision. Through her scope, she watched shadows dart between buildings, dust trailing their movements. They thought the storm had given them cover. They didn't know patience still watched. The seals began moving west. Daniels carried between Martinez and Cooper, every step a strain. Limp beside them, jaw clenched against the pain in his shoulder. Blackwood uncovered the rear, rifles sweeping the alleys. The air was thick with dust, every breath scraping lungs raw. The city felt alive again, whispering threats through every window, every broken door. Movement east side, barked. Before Blackwood could respond, Sarah's voice cut in over the net. I've got them, hold your fire. Blackwood froze, trusting the silence on the line. Then her rifle cracked in the distance, sharp and final, blinked. Target down. Another shot, another shadow collapsed into the dirt. Blackwood felt something shift inside him, an almost physical loosening. He wasn't leading alone anymore. For the first time since this mission began, he wasn't carrying all the weight. Sarah's scope tracked another fighter darting between alleys, his rifle raised toward the seal's path. She exhaled, squeezed, watched him crumple mid-step. Mason murmured, "That's 4 down in under a minute." Sarah didn't flinch. They'll send more. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt the drain. Each shot was a calculation, each calculation a weight. She could almost hear her grandfather's voice again. Every trigger pull stays with you, Sarah. They don't leave when the mission ends. They pile up. But there was no room for that weight now, only the math of survival. The seals pushed another block west, boots crunching through debris. Blackwood pressed the radio. Reeves, route looks clear, confirm. Sarah scanned ahead. Her scope found an intersection, sunlight breaking through dust. For a moment it looked empty, too empty. Wait, she whispered. She adjusted focus, narrowing on a glint at the corner, a barrel just peeking. Ambush. 2 hostiles north side, 1 west. Hold your men. Blackwood raised a fist, halting the team instantly, sucked in a sharp breath. They couldn't afford delays, not with Daniel's pulse fatting. Reeves, Blackwood muttered, we don't have time to wait them out. You won't have time to survive if you walk into it, she countered, calm, unshaken. 30 seconds. He grit his teeth. Trust was acid on his tongue, but his gut said she was right. 30 seconds later, her rifle cracked twice, then silence. Clear, Sarah confirmed. Blackwood exhaled slowly, waving his men forward. As they moved, he caught himself muttering under his breath, I'll be damned. At the rooftop, Mason watched her work with awe. How do you keep so steady? Sarah's eyes stayed locked on the scope. Because it's not about me, it's about them. Mason frowned. You mean the SEALs? Her voice softened, almost a whisper. All of them, every man I've ever had in my scope, enemy or ally, their lives don't vanish when I pull the trigger. They echo. Mason swallowed, words caught in his throat. He realized then that Reeves wasn't cold. She wasn't detached. She carried more than anyone he'd ever met. 2 blocks later, the SEALs reached the husk of an old marketplace, stalls long abandoned, tarps whipping in the dying wind. The place stank of ash and rot, shadows stretching long in the rising sun. Daniels moaned, head rolling weakly. Cooper cursed under his breath. Lieutenant, we can't carry him much farther. Blackwood looked at his men, at their hollow eyes, their shaking arms. He pressed the radio. Reeves, we need extraction soon or we're losing him. Her reply was immediate. I'll hold you until the birds are back. You just keep moving. Blackwood stared into the marketplace, suspicion crawling up his spine. It was too open, too exposed. He pressed the radio again. What do you see? There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, quieter now. More than I can stop at once. Blackwood's chest tightened. How many? Her silence was the answer. Sarah's scope swept the rooftops around the marketplace. Shapes moved in the dust, rifles glinting in sunlight. A dozen at least, maybe more. They weren't rushing this time. They were waiting, trapping. Mason's voice shook. They know we're guiding them here. They're setting the kill box. Sarah adjusted her position, steadying her breath. Then we break it before it closes. Her finger rested on the trigger. She exhaled and the first shot cracked. The marketplace erupted. Bullets shredded tarps, shattered stalls, kicked up clouds of dust and wood. Blackwood shoved Daniels down, covering his head as Cooper and Martinez threw themselves over him. Contact, multiple hostiles, shouted, firing back blindly. Blackwood pressed the radio, voice ragged. Reeves were pinned. Her reply came calm, sharp. Stay low, I've got you. Then her rifle spoke again. 1 hostile dropped from a rooftop, another spun backward into the dust. She fired again, cutting down a third who tried to flank. But there were too many. For every one she dropped, more poured into position. Mason's hands shook as he spotted. They'll overrun the SEALs before you can clear them all. Sarah's jaw tightened. Not if we move. She grabbed her rifle, slinging it tight, already scanning for a new angle. Mason blinked. What are you doing? Changing the fight, she said simply. Blackwood's men fired from cover, rounds sparking off stone. Martinez grunted, a bullet grazing his arm. Daniels barely stirred, slipping closer to nothing. Blackwood's stomach clenched. He could feel the box tightening. He could feel death coming. Then through the chaos, a voice cracked over the radio, steady, unyielding. Lieutenant, on my mark, move your men south. I'll draw fire. Blackwood froze. That's suicide. Her reply was soft, almost quiet, but certain. Sometimes survival demands sacrifice. You taught me that, whether you meant to or not. For the first time, Blackwood had no words. What drives a person to step into the line of fire when everyone else is trying to escape it? Blackwood's radio crackled with her voice, steady as a metronome. "On my mark, you move south. No hesitation." His gut clenched. He knew what she was about to do. "Reeves, don't." 3. "Damn it, listen to me." 2. He gritted his teeth, every instinct screaming. 1. "Move." The sound of her rifle cracked again, but this time it wasn't from her rooftop perch. It was closer, too close. Blackwood's head snapped up. Through the dust and chaos of the marketplace, he glimpsed her silhouette darting across a broken rooftop, firing with mechanical precision. Each shot carved space for his men. "Move," Blackwood roared, shoving his men forward, and sprinted ahead, dragging Martinez. Cooper hoisted Daniels onto his back, staggering under the weight but refusing to let go. Bullets tore into the market, ripping through tarps and stone. Blackwood fired bursts as he covered the rear, but his eyes kept dragging back to her. To Reeves, the one he'd sworn didn't belong, now standing where no one else dared. Sarah's world had shrunk to rhythm. Exhale, squeeze, shift, move. She fired from one corner, dropped flat, rolled to another, fired again. To the enemy, she was everywhere at once. She felt the burn of grit in her eyes, the ache in her chest. Each recoil slammed into her shoulder like a hammer, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. "Every trigger pull stays with you, Sarah." Her grandfather's words echoed in her skull. But so did Daniel's shallow breaths, so did the voices of the men who thought she'd never measure up. Tonight, her bullets weren't just steel, they were answers. Mason's voice shouted through her earpiece, panicked. "You're too exposed, they'll zero you." She ignored him, adjusting for a crosswind, sighting a fighter crouching behind a crumbling wall. One squeeze and the man folded. The seals broke through the southern edge of the marketplace, spilling into narrow alleys. Cooper staggered under Daniels, weight, teeth bared against exhaustion. Blackwood fired short bursts behind them, urging them forward. The radio hissed, barked, "She's still up there covering us." Blackwood's chest twisted. He wanted to drag her down, to force her out of the line of fire, but distance made him powerless. All he could do was move his men faster. "South Alley 2 blocks." Reeves' voice cut through again, sharp, unwavering. "Extraction bird is circling back. You hold that point and you live." Blackwood forced his men forward, but his throat burned with words unsaid. On the rooftop, Sarah shifted position again, rifle steady. Through her scope, she caught the outline of a hostile climbing higher, setting up to flank the SEAL's escape route. She drew in a breath, settled the crosshairs. Exhale, squeeze. The man dropped. But in the same instant, fire erupted from her left. A second hostile, hidden in the rubble, had been waiting for her to expose herself. The round tore past her shoulder, ripping fabric, searing skin. She rolled, pain lancing through her arm, but kept her rifle tight. Another shot slammed stone inches from her head. Mason screamed through the earpiece, "They've got you bracketed." Sarah pressed her cheek back to the stock, ignoring the sting of blood. She adjusted, fired once, twice. Silence followed. Her breath came ragged. She pressed a hand against the hot wetness seeping through her sleeve. The wound burned, but it wasn't deep enough to stop her. Not yet. She muttered under her breath, almost a prayer, still breathing, still fighting. Blackwood's men reached the alley mouth, lungs burning, boots pounding broken pavement. Dropped into cover, firing back into the market. Cooper collapsed to a knee, Daniels limp on his shoulders. Blackwood spun, firing controlled bursts into the dust, but he couldn't shake the pounding in his chest. Reeves hadn't checked in. "Reeves' status," he barked into the radio. "Silence." He grit his teeth, pressing harder. "Reeves, talk to me." Finally her voice came through, strained but steady. "Still here." Relief punched through him, so hard it felt like pain. Sarah dragged herself to a new position, ignoring the throb in her arm. Through her scope, she watched the SEALs funnel into the southern alley, pulling Daniels with them. She exhaled shakily. They were almost through. But then movement caught her eye, shadows shifting on rooftops above their path. The enemy wasn't done. She pressed the radio. Blackwood roof 3 o'clock, 2 hostiles lining your path. He didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, sighted the rooftop she'd marked, and fired. One hostile crumpled, followed, dropping the second. For the first time, their coordination was seamless. No hesitation, no second guessing. Sarah's lips tightened into the faintest ghost of a smile. The seals reached the alley's end, spilling into a courtyard of shattered walls and collapsed beams. Dust swirled in the morning light. The whine of rotor blades grew louder now, cutting through the air like a promise. Blackwood pressed the radio. "Reeves, birds inbound, we're at the LZ." Her reply came low. "Hold that ground, I'll cover your 6. "Negative," he snapped. "You're too far exposed, fall back." She didn't answer. "Mason," Blackwood barked, "what's her position?" The spotter's voice came ragged, panicked. "She's still on the market roof. She won't leave." Blackwood's jaw locked. Pride, anger, respect, fear, they all tangled into something sharp in his chest. For months he'd treated her like a shadow, a name on paper, a mistake. Now she was the reason his men were alive, and she was about to throw herself away to finish the job. "Reeves," he said, voice dropping lower, heavier, "don't you dare stay behind." For a moment only static answered. Then her voice, quiet but resolute. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, Lieutenant, it simply acts." His chest ached at the words. Gunfire erupted again as hostiles surged from alleys, desperate to cut off the extraction. Sarah kept firing, each shot carving a path, each breath steadier than the last despite the blood soaking her sleeve. Mason's voice cracked beside her. "We've got to fall back, you'll die here." Sarah's eyes stayed locked to the scope. "Then I'll die buying them time." The helicopter roared into view above the courtyard, dust whipping into a cyclone. Blackwood's men dragged Daniels forward, signaling frantically. The bird hovered, rope lines unfurling. But fire poured in from the flanks, rattling the walls, pinning them. Screamed, clutching his shoulder where another round grazed him. Martinez fired wildly, keeping them at bay. Blackwood pressed the radio, desperation finally breaking his tone. "Reeves, we're pinned. We can't get on that bird without you." For the first time, there was no reply, only the steady crack of her rifle in the distance. Blackwood's gut twisted. He turned to, voice sharp, "Cover them." Then he sprinted back toward the market. Shouted after him, but Blackwood didn't hear. He only knew one truth: he wasn't leaving her behind. Not now, not after everything. Why do some people risk everything for those who once doubted them? Blackwood's boots pounded broken pavement as he sprinted back into the storm of gunfire. Dust burned his lungs, bullets snapped past his head, but he didn't slow. Pride had kept him blind for too long. Now, pride was the very thing he had to shed. He spotted her through the haze, Sarah Reeves, prone on the shattered rooftop, rifle steady, blood soaking her sleeve. Every shot she fired kept his men alive at the LZ. Every second she stayed there pulled her further from survival. "Reeves," he roared, voice tearing against the storm. She didn't turn, she didn't break rhythm. Exhale, squeeze, shift, fire, a machine of patience and will. Blackwood scrambled up the crumbling stairs, each step echoing with the thought that he might be too late. He reached the rooftop just as she fired again, dropping a hostile aiming for the helicopter. Up close she looked even more unshakable and yet human. Sweat streaked her face. Blood slicked her arm. Her jaw clenched against pain, but her eyes never left the scope. "You're going to die here," Blackwood growled, dropping beside her. Her reply was flat, steady. "Better me than them." "No," he snapped. He grabbed her arm, pulling her hand from the trigger. "Not today, not like this." Her eyes flicked to him then, just for a heartbeat. There was no fear in them, only the weight of someone who had always carried more than anyone asked her to. "Blackwood," she said quietly, "you once told them I didn't belong. If I die here, at least they'll know I did." The words hit harder than any bullet. Blackwood's throat tightened. He didn't have time for speeches, but the truth burned too hot to stay buried. "I was wrong," he said, voice breaking. "You belong more than any of us, and if you die here, we all die with you, so move." For the first time, her composure cracked. The faintest flicker of surprise, of something unspoken, crossed her face. Then she nodded. Together they rose. The gunfire below intensified as the helicopter hovered, rope lines whipping in the wind, and the others returned fire desperately, shielding Cooper and Daniels as they scrambled toward the bird. 2 minutes, the pilot barked over comms, straining against incoming fire. Sarah and Blackwood burst from the building, sprinting through dust and bullets. She fired on the run, dropping one hostile who rose from behind cover. Blackwood gunned down another, the two of them moving like they'd trained together their entire lives. For once there was no doubt, no hesitation, only trust. They reached the courtyard as the helicopter roared overhead, its downdraft blasting grit into their faces. Waved frantically, covering their approach. "Go, go, go," he shouted. Cooper and Martinez hauled Daniels onto the rope, the medic strapping him tight as the bird began to lift. Followed, grimacing through the pain in his shoulder. Sarah covered the flank, her last magazine feeding through her rifle. Blackwood fired in tandem, their rifles speaking one rhythm. But then crack! A round tore into Sarah's side, spinning her half around. She stumbled, breath catching, knees nearly giving. Blackwood caught her under the arm, dragging her toward the rope. Her face was pale, lips tight against the pain. "Leave me," she rasped. He snarled back, "Not a chance." She tried to push him off, but her strength faltered. For all her resilience, her body was breaking. Blackwood tightened his grip, voice like iron. "You carried us, now let me carry you." He hooked her to the rope, ignoring her weak protest. "Climb," he ordered. Her eyes met his, glassy but fierce. "You'll die if you stay." "Then I'll die knowing I finally did something right," he shot back. Before she could argue, he shoved her upward, signaling the crew. The winch pulled her off the ground, her body rising slowly into the storm-whipped air. Blackwood turned back, rifle barking until the bolt locked empty. Covered him, shouting, "Lieutenant, your turn." Blackwood sprinted for the rope, grabbing hold as the helicopter strained skyward. Bullets sliced past, one grazing his helmet, another shattering stone at his feet. But then he was rising, the ground falling away. Below, hostiles swarmed the courtyard too late, their rounds chasing shadows. The bird lifted, blades screaming against the storm, pulling them into the sky. Inside the helicopter, chaos reigned. Cooper worked furiously on Daniels. Martinez slumped against the wall, gritted through pain, checked his weapon with shaking hands. Blackwood dragged himself aboard, chest heaving. He turned immediately to Sarah, who lay against the floor, pale and bleeding but alive. Her eyes fluttered open, all accounted for. He nodded, voice hoarse, "All accounted for." She let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh. Then it was worth it. Blackwood stared at her, words caught in his throat. Finally, he managed, "You didn't just save us. You proved me wrong, and I'll never forget it." Her lips curved faintly. "Took you long enough." Despite everything, the blood, the dust, the wreckage of the night, he almost smiled. The helicopter roared out of, the storm shrinking behind them, the city fading into a blur of red and gold. Dawn broke fully now, sunlight spilling across the desert. Inside, the SEALs sat in silence, the kind that only comes after standing too close to death. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They simply breathed, each one knowing breath itself was victory. Blackwood sat across from Sarah, watching as the medic bound her wounds. She winced but never made a sound. Even broken, she carried herself with a steadiness He thought of the words he'd thrown at her months ago. He thought of how wrong he'd been. And he thought of what she'd said in the storm. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Now he understood. Later, when the bird touched down at Fob Liberty, the men filed out in silence. Daniels rushed to medics, others limping toward stretchers. Blackwood lingered at the ramp, watching Sarah rise slowly to her feet, leaning on Mason for balance. He stepped forward, chest heavy, and did something he'd never done for anyone outside his own command. He saluted her. Not the clipped, obligatory gesture of rank, a slow, deliberate salute, one born of respect earned the hard way. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Then she returned it, her movements stiff but steady. No words passed between them. None were needed. That night, long after the storm had passed and the desert lay quiet under the stars, Sarah sat alone with her rifle, the old bandana tied around its stock. She traced the fabric with her fingers, thinking of her grandfather, of Montana snow, of the silence that had shaped her life. The faces of those she'd killed would never leave her, neither would the faces she'd saved. She carried them all as she always had. But tonight she carried something else too, a proof. That silence wasn't weakness. That dignity didn't demand acknowledgement, it simply endured. And sometimes, when the storm closed in, it answered the final call from the dark. Because in the end, the story wasn't about rank or recognition. It wasn't about pride or prejudice. It was about one truth whispered through the desert wind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.